Right, so I'm really pleased today to have along with us Lisa Making, who is the Executive Director at the Royal Tyrrell Museum of Paleontology in Alberta, Canada. And yeah, so it's a great opportunity for us to hear more about the museum and to find out more about Lisa's role. So hi Lisa, how are you today?
I'm great. Thank you, Charles. Thank you for inviting me. This is a wonderful opportunity.
Yeah, we last spoke to you 6 years ago when you were Director of Exhibitions and Communications at the museum, and you've recently, earlier this year, you become Executive Director, so well done on that.
Thank you very much. It was definitely an interesting time to take on this role. Which is a story into itself, but I'm grateful for the opportunity, and getting this museum reopened was quite an interesting task, and I'm glad I got to be the one to do it, as someone who knows the institution as well as I do. So
yeah, because you've been there, what, 13 years?
Yeah, 13 years. This is my third position, and I guess I'm the storybook of being able to move up within an organization, and very grateful for that. This is a spectacular museum to get to work in. So
absolutely, absolutely. And you spent a year in Otago, is that right? When you were just
in Otago, Dunedin, in New Zealand. So and worked for a small museum there for just under a year, which was an amazing opportunity. I love New Zealand, and I keep saying if I ever had the opportunity, I would love to move back. Perhaps that's where I retire.
Right.
I also did my master's degree at Newcastle upon Tyne in North England, and had the opportunity to do some work with the National Museums of Scotland in Edinburgh when I was quite young. We won't talk too much about that. But I got some great experiences with some amazing institutions.
And you saw Newcastle at night as well. You were out on the town or the Tyne in Newcastle.
Sometimes we were. I was your typical North American student.
Okay.
So the Newcastle nightlife was eye-opening for me when I got there.
It's eye-opening for most people, I think.
But an amazing city, and the museums there are spectacular. I'm still blown away by the arts and culture scene in Newcastle.
Fantastic. And so in terms of your role, we'll move on in a moment to your role as it is now and dealing with COVID and the way forward. But I thought it's worth highlighting that over the last, you led the communication strategy over the last 5-6 years, and the attendance has gone up by 24% in that time. So I thought you could perhaps expand upon that. What's behind the increase in attendance?
I think there was some good fortune with our communications at the same time. So when I first started at the museum, our average, and this was 13 years ago, our average attendance was about 325,000 visitors, and which was a solid number when you consider that this museum is located an hour and a half outside of an urban center. Yeah. So we're actually in it, for those who don't know us, we're actually in a community of 8,000 people. So it's 325,000 is nothing to sneeze at. Yeah. Over the next few years, though, the province of Alberta, the population just grew exponentially, and yet our attendance wasn't keeping up with that growth. And so we developed a strategy with our exhibits and our communications so that we were making sure that we were hitting the right targets, being much more focused, looking at the tourism market a lot more, and integrating ourselves with our tourism development agencies within the province and aligning those partnerships a little bit more closely. Then, of course, we had Jurassic World came out. So learning how to leverage ourselves up against the blockbuster movies and make ourselves a little bit more of that destination. So that when I became Director of Exhibits and Communications, we were at about a 370,000 mark. By the time I became Executive Director, our average attendance now is between 430 to 450,000 visitors. We actually peaked a couple of years ago at 498,000 visitors. Just couldn't break that 500,000. We were so close.
Still time.
But we'll get there. We'll get back there. And when you consider that's visitors from 150 countries, it's pretty remarkable.
Well, absolutely, because you know you're pretty much in the middle of the continent, aren't you, in terms of where you're located? And as you say, the nearest enormous big cosmopolitan city is Calgary, which isn't saying too much.
I think part of the biggest selling point for the museum that we brought up in our communication strategy was the location. Getting to the museum is part of your journey with the museum. So we included that as part of the messaging and part of your adventure. Because if you hadn't seen us, if you drive along through the Alberta plains, and they're pretty flat, pretty nondescript, and then about an hour and a half into that drive, you suddenly drop down into this valley with dramatic hills, and it's quite a stunning departure from the last hour and a half that you had driving. And it just evokes images of dinosaurs and that atmosphere, and that's what most people associate. So whenever I would talk to anybody, what is the one thing that you remember about your visit to the museum? I remember dropping down into that valley and seeing the landscape. That's the first memory that they have. Not our dinosaurs yet, not the actual building, but getting into the valley.
Wow, yeah, it's a really. I've not been to the museum yet, but I've seen photographs, and it's really a dramatic backdrop, isn't it, with the Badlands all around.
Exactly, and that's our playground. That's where our fieldwork occurs. So being able to leverage some of that, we get visitors from around the world, other museum professionals who come out here trying to figure out how we do what we do. And I would say a good portion of our success is the fact that we're located in these Badlands.
Absolutely, and you're a research center, so you've got full-time scientists working there all the time.
Exactly, we've got 6 full-time paleontologists who are out in the field still as we speak, and they have specific areas that they work in depending on the nature of their paleontological research. But they're in the Badlands, they're in the foothills of the mountains, they're throughout the province, and always doing some work either independently or with industry. Alberta has one of the most comprehensive fossil protection laws in the world right now, actually, and we're being used as a model for the protection laws we have in place. So quite often, if you're in the Natural History Museum in London or the American Museum of Natural History, you will see dinosaurs that are found in Alberta. And they were all found and excavated before we opened and before those legislation was put into act. Now you won't.
you can't dig now without a license, can't you?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Fossils, yeah. You have to go through a permitting process with us.
Right. Okay. I was going to mention as well. You said that you'd noticed over the past 20 years at the museum that the museum's essential storyline had vanished a little bit because the different galleries evolved at different speeds. I wonder if you could expand upon that.
When the museum first opened, it was a pretty simple storyline of the formation of the Earth to the Pleistocene, so about 11,000 years ago. And it was a simple storyline. I call it the IKEA path. There's one direction that you go through, and there's advantages to that. And over the years, as different discoveries were being made throughout the province and different research priorities and exhibit priorities were popping up, that storyline started to diminish quite a bit. And when I became the director of exhibits, I wanted us to refocus back into that. I thought that was a really neat strength that this museum has over a lot of others, and that we're teaching you about the history of life on Earth. And so one of the first galleries that I took on when I became director was what we call now our Foundations exhibit. And that exhibit teaches people about the formation of the planets, about the formation of Earth, and then about the foundations of paleontology. It's an easier version of Paleontology 101, basically, and why Alberta is so significant in the paleontological record. And so we wanted to set that groundwork again and reintroduce that concept to our visitors so that they have a good idea of the scientific research. So we talked about it a lot with evolution, which is always a bit of a hot topic in some areas. And it's something that we talk about openly, and it is who we are. So I wanted to make sure that was back in our messaging again.
Absolutely. And at the moment, you're in the final stages of putting together an exhibition about the Cenozoic, right? Yes.
So the Cenozoic, that gallery it's the last gallery in our timeline, of course. And it hadn't been touched since 1985 when the museum first opened. So you can imagine what it was looking like. The exhibits were inaccessible. The design was out of date. The specimens were they're not Alberta based. And over those 35 years that the museum had been open, we had amassed this amazing collection of Alberta mammals that had diversified after the 65 million years ago, after the KPG boundary. And so we wanted to change that story. And dinosaurs, don't get me wrong, dinosaurs are rock stars for the museum, but we wanted to show people just how amazing mammals are and what our evolution looks like, while also reinforcing the concept of climate change, and which is an important topic to discuss. And so we wanted people to get an understanding of the differences between natural climate change and anthropomorphic climate change. And so we started to reinforce that, and Cenozoic brings that back together for us. So it takes you from the day the meteor hit, basically. We're calling it a deadly day, where we talk about the end of dinosaurs and the mass extinctions that occurred. But then we also talk about that celebration of biodiversity and the diversity of mammals that arose pretty quickly after dinosaurs died off. Right. And so we introduced the concepts of flight, body size. So we've got everything from teeny tiny little mammals to the massive scope, and just educating people on it. So it's going to be a fun exhibit. It should be opening around the beginning of December.
Fantastic. So let's, I think the rocky subject of coronavirus must rear its head now, because I think you guys were one of the first museums to reopen after the pandemic. So
in North America, I think we were one of the first major ones. Us and our sister museum, the Royal Alberta Museum in Edmonton, both opened up in May. We both closed on March 18th and then reopened late May. And we were setting a lot of the groundwork because there wasn't a lot of information. We were looking a lot to Europe and to Japan on what other museums were doing and how to adapt them to our audiences. And we were all nervous. There was a lot of anxiety around reopening for our staff, but we did so carefully and strategically, and we let our frontline staff drive the safety calls, and that was the biggest part. They're the ones who are going to be out there every day. We wanted to make sure that they felt safe, and so we worked with Alberta Health Services and our frontline staff to come up with a plan. And our visitor response, we weren't sure what to expect, but our visitor response was positive and swift. They were anxious to come out. The moment we announced that we were going to be opening, we were getting phone calls and people wanting to book in. I think people were hungry for anything that was a little bit, that resembled some normalcy, as much as the changes are normal, but they wanted to get out of the house and do something a little bit different once again. And so I'm thrilled that we were able to do so safely. Between May and September, we had about 1,000 people a day, which is only at 25% of our capacity for the summer. So it's a shot economically, but at least our visitors got to experience what we could offer. And there were some disappointed people. We sold out every day, and so they weren't able to get in, but we're hoping that will carry through our winter season, which tends to be a little quieter.
Yeah, speaking to attractions, I think the support of the local communities has been one of the really positive things to come out of this, because it's quite heartening to see how important you are to the local environment.
There's a great importance to the mental well-being of people, and I think people are slowly starting to realize what museums and galleries can bring to that health and well-being to our visitors and to your staff, and just that escape that we provide. Like I said, it brings a little bit of normalcy back into a very strange world we're in.
Yeah. How are you coping with I know last year you launched a learning lounge, which was specifically hands-on, and I presume it's hands-off now. So
it's a completely hands-off right now. We did close it when we reopened, and we left it closed because we want to take some time to evaluate how we can reopen it safely, and so that people can go in there and still gather a lot of the learning objectives we had for the space, but do so without it being so hands-on-y. So we're doing a lot of research on what other science museums and other hands-on areas are doing in conversations with some colleagues. So it might be adopting, for our touch videos, for instance, it might be a simple QR code now that people can scan with, which is funny because a couple years ago I hated QR codes.
Yeah.
And now I'm looking at where can we put them in? But
for a long time they've been really popular in Asia, and they just weren't catching on over here. And
not at all. And now I'm seeing it in restaurants. When you do go out, instead of a menu now, they're giving you a QR code so that your phone becomes your menu, which I think is a great idea. So let's see how we can adopt that. So we're going to be evaluating that Learning Lounge over the fall and see where it goes. Because I suspect we'll be in a similar place for a little while with the physical distancing and the hands-on elements.
Right. And what about, I know that the museum is is it part government funded? Is that right?
We are a government institution, so we are a branch of the Alberta government. Some of our funding does come from the government. Others, we work closely. We have a friends group who run our museum shop, and so we work closely with them. So it's a combination, but we are a branch of government. Okay.
And in terms of, so you've been dealing with communications, and how is it getting involved in social media, for example, and getting the museum online in terms of engagement with the audience?
We've been pretty fortunate in that the Tyrrell has had a very strong social media following for a decade now, easily. And we were able to leverage that quite a bit. So using the museum from home hashtag, we kind of tailored it to ourselves, RTMP from home. And we developed a series of videos and then some activities, coloring pages, etc., that people can use when they were locked up, basically. Yeah. And that proved to be extremely successful. We engaged over 1 million followers through all of our social media platforms. And our videos were, I think I was reading this morning, our videos have been watched over 50,000 times. Right. So people are using them still. And so we're having a lot of fun with being able to keep people engaged with our content, even if they can't visit just yet.
Okay. And you've mentioned, changes you'll need to make in terms of a new cultural and economic environment. And you've got a strategic plan you're working on. So if you could perhaps tell us more about that.
Right before the pandemic hit, we had actually developed a strategic plan for the museum, and it was the first time the museum has ever had one in 35 years, which is shocking. I think we were just open our doors and see what happens for all of that time. So we started to see some shifts socially and economically, and we thought a couple years ago, let's connect with our community and our stakeholders and see where we want to go in the next coming years. But when the pandemic hit, that put a lot of things on pause. And so we kind of parked it for a few months, and now we're digging it back out and ready to launch it publicly so that we're able to talk about some of our goals and things that we want to do and build as an institution. And I love the idea of this being timed with, not love it, but I appreciate the timing of this strategic plan with coming through this pandemic and how we have to adjust ourselves as an institution and make some changes as an institution in order to continue to be successful. So we're looking at things as right now, we are a scientific research facility, but we want to make sure that we are that go-to paleontological resource for the public to connect with, not just within Alberta and Canada, but internationally, so that we maintain that reputation. We want to look at being able to strengthen our public value. So looking for more than just being that tourism destination, but how are we that place that brings you joy and helps you escape, but also lets you learn at the same time, and being socially responsible at the same time. Then also building some of our relationships. So working more collaboratively with some new communities, with new teachers, with scientists, with other researchers and amateur paleontologists, and engaging with them a little bit more. And then of course, diversity, equitable, accessible, inclusive, and the biggest one I think for a lot of organizations coming out in the next few months is financial resiliency. And that sustainability, that financial sustainability is going to be really important. And what changes do we need to make to do that while adhering to our core values?
What you you mentioned you have visitors from over 150 countries. What's the sort of, how many tourists do you get and how many locals? What's the breakdown?
The bulk of our attendance is from southern Alberta. So I would say about 75 to 80% come from, in a normal year. I'm not going to include this year. Normally 75 to 80% are from southern Alberta. Outside of that, we get neighboring provinces, so British Columbia, Saskatchewan. The United States is definitely one of our largest tourism opportunities. The UK, we get quite a few visitors from the UK, Germany, Japan. China was a market that was recently opening up quite a bit to us as well. So that's the bulk of where our museum attendance comes from. Canada first, US, UK. Right. Sometimes UK and US are about the same, which is interesting.
Okay. What's the nearest sort of large other attraction or museum to where you are?
For Alberta, the largest museum or attraction would be the Calgary Stampede.
Okay.
And that happens the first week of July every year.
And
the Rocky Mountains is really our biggest competitor.
Of course, yeah.
And really, how do you do with that?
Yeah. Well, I was thinking, I've flown into Calgary a couple of times, and it just appears to be flat all around there for miles and miles. But yes. Then I know you go visiting the mountains. So as you said, you're in a kind of bowl. Is that right?
Yes. So to the west of Calgary, you've got the majestic Royal Rocky Mountains, which are stunning and beautiful. And then if you go east, it's flat prairie. The joke is you can watch your dog run away for days. Until you get to the Drumheller Valley, when it just kind of sinks in and you're actually buried into the earth a little bit, which is quite a distinction from the Rockies. Calgary also has the Glenbow Museum, which is a phenomenal museum, and the National Music Center are also very great museums. But in terms of attendance for the province, I believe it's the Rocky Mountains, West Edmonton Shopping Mall, one of the world's largest shopping malls, and the Royal Tyrrell Museum are among the top tourism destinations.
Good stuff. Let's just touch on for a moment the exhibits you have there, because I know there are various museums around the world that have great dinosaur exhibits, but it's basically, you are a museum just of paleontology. So where would you say your particular strength lies?
For Alberta, it's the Cretaceous, the late Cretaceous. So you're talking things like Albertosaurus, Gorgosaurus, T-Rex kind of comes in a little bit later. We have a couple of T-Rex on display that are from Alberta, which are always popular. One named Black Beauty, and Black Beauty was found by several young men who are out fishing in the Crowsnest Pass near the Rockies. And it's this beautiful black juvenile T-Rex that's just stunning. But I think lately the biggest discovery for us was one that was actually found through an industry relationship. So a number of years ago, our staff received a phone call from Suncor Millennium Mine, which is up in just outside Fort McMurray in northern Alberta. And one of their shovel operators had found something that they weren't quite sure what it was. And so they contacted their geologist on site, and he said, call the museum right away. So they contacted us, and given the location of the mine, our scientists assumed going up that it was going to be a marine reptile, because we were in the Bear Paw Sea, and that would have made the most sense. And so when they got up there, they were completely shocked, because what they were seeing was actual dinosaur material, which would have been in the deep sea, which in itself is an amazing feat, let alone the kind of dinosaur that they found in the preservation. What we ended up unearthing, and it took 7 years to prepare this specimen because of the nature of the rock, was this magnificent nodosaur. And it's been named, its name is Borealopelta Mark Mitchellii. Right. And it's named after the gentleman who spent 7 years preparing it.
Well, he's your preparation guy there at the museum, isn't he?
Yes, Mark Mitchell. The skill and the dedication and patience to work on this specimen was amazing. And the preservation of this animal made news around the world when we launched this one. We worked very closely with National Geographic on the launch of this specimen, and we did some 3D scans of it. And it's almost like it's a dragon that fell asleep. And I know our scientists would shudder at me by calling it a dragon.
Don't use the word dragon.
Exactly. But it's got the spikes are magnificent and dramatic. And you can see the wrinkles and the fold in the skin. Wow. It's that well preserved. And I kind of call it the specimen that keeps on giving, because we've been able to determine the coloration of these animals. Wow. We've been doing analysis on the gut contents. So we're getting an idea of what this animal's last meal was. And some of the unique stories that are coming from it are remarkable. So one being the nature of the story, the discovery is one of my favorites. The shovel operator, Sean Funk is his name. And I know everybody wanted us to call it Funkosaurus, but that wasn't gonna happen. But Sean Funk had actually just gone back onto shift at Suncor that day after being away with his family for a week. And they were actually just at the museum 3 days before. Yeah. He found the specimen, and I just love that tie that he had with the museum and making this discovery, and how excited he was to preserve this part of history.
And he might not have noticed that he'd not been to the museum just a few days before.
Exactly, and we're so grateful that he recognized that difference, because when you see the size of these shovels, they're massive pieces of equipment. So for him to be able to notice that difference in the rock formation was just amazing to me. Next is the actual, so there's the preservation of it at that 7-year process, but just the nature of this specimen and how it came to be preserved. Yeah. So one of the lead scientists on it, Dr. Don Henderson, he calls it a bloat and float. So the animal died and floated out along the shoreline, and floated out to sea and bloated up. And quite often you'll see that, like with whales, for instance, they'll bloat up. And then it got so far out that it ruptured, and it sank so quickly from that rupturing that it buried itself in the sand, in the ocean, in the seafloor. And the burial was quick so that it was preserved, so no scavengers got to it.
Right.
And so it's almost like it's mummified.
Yeah, it's 3D. It looks 3D, doesn't it?
It is. It is completely 3D, which is amazing. So we've been able to have a lot of fun learning a lot about these animals through this one specimen. Another remarkable part of it is it's older. It's perhaps the oldest dinosaur. Well, it's definitely the oldest dinosaur we found so far in Alberta, let alone in Canada. It's about 110 million years old. Wow. Which really outdates a lot of the work that we do already. So there's so much great potential out there. And maintaining those relationships with industry has really helped us with that scientific research.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the nodosaur is amazing because it was found 800 miles from the sea. I mean, it's a marine environment where it was found.
Exactly. So the geologist on site at first thought it was a petrified tree, which we find everywhere in Alberta. Right. And then they thought, no, this is a little different. And like I said, even our scientists thought it was just going to be another marine reptile. And listen to me, another marine reptile. It's and yet it's one of, arguably one of the most amazing specimens to be found.
Absolutely, I've heard it called the Mona Lisa of the paleontology world, and I plan to see it sometime. I've noticed you've got dinosaurs behind you, and I got one here as well.
You've got They're everywhere. I think the moment you start working in here, everyone starts gifting you dinosaur things.
Yeah. So you're scientists, because this nodosaur was discovered, in 2011? And they're working on it. And it often takes, as you say, many years to actually reveal these to the public. So your team are presumably working on other dinosaurs all the time.
They are. We are working on some a few spectacular things, which I'm not really allowed to talk about, that we're hoping to, we try to work very collaboratively with our scientific team so that as a major paper is about to be published, we make sure we get that specimen on display.
Right. Okay.
So that the public, they can see it, read about it in the news, and then come and see it right away at the museum. And we wanted, it's been a finely honed relationship in timing that out. And we've come up with a really good plan on how to do that. Some amazing specimens have been unveiled through this Hellboy a number of years ago. which was a ceratopsian, a beautiful ceratopsian. We've got another one that's coming up, hopefully this fall.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll see how the publications go. Next spring. It'll be in the spring.
Okay, one to watch that. And out of interest, I know a lot of museums, they have, there's the casts on display rather than the actual bones. Is that the case with Royal Tyrrell mostly, or?
We've been working very hard to make sure we get original material out as much as possible. The only time we'll actively use a cast is for the preservation. And as most people know, rock is heavy. And sometimes displaying them in a very dramatic way can be a challenge, but there's always innovative ways of being able to mount real specimens now safely. So there was a point in time in the museum where casts, it was almost a 60% original, 40% cast. I'd say we've moved that up towards an 80 to 20% now, where we're just trying to make sure that our visitors get to see the real things as much as possible. Right. And understand that they come from Alberta. We've really made a focus on showing Alberta material.
Fantastic. And we've had, as you know, this has been a really catastrophic year for the museum industry. And we asked the same question of people we've spoken to from art galleries. Is there a particular piece in your collection that you particularly like in terms of being perhaps a comfort in hard times?
For me, one of my favorites is it is a marine reptile, so it's not a dinosaur. It is a mosasaur that, and I think because I was first introduced to it when I started at the museum, and I'd never heard anything about it. My background was archaeology, so paleontology was a new world for me. And the scientist that was working on this one specimen took the time to walk me through all the really cool bits of information about this mosasaur. It has a tooth embedded in its jaw that shows interspecies fighting. So it's a tooth from another mosasaur. You can see the ocular components of the eye in it, which is amazing. And then talking about the jaws and just how this animal evolved to adapt to its environment was truly remarkable. To having a row of teeth along the upper ridge of its mouth to capture other fish, so it couldn't catch, like, it was just such a smart and interesting animal that I'd never heard about, but there's something I love about it because it's so unique. So for me, it's not necessarily a dinosaur.
No,
yeah.
Technically not a dinosaur. Okay, well, Lisa, it's been absolutely fascinating to hear from you. I really appreciate you speaking to us. I should say, all our attendees, if you want to send questions for Lisa, you can send them on the platform, and she can get back to you via the platform. So that just leaves me to wish you all the best for the coming year ahead with the new exhibitions. And once again, thanks very much for talking to us.
Thank you very much, Charles. It was an absolute pleasure, and I look forward to catching up with you again soon.